The water of Miller's Creek ran cold that September morning, colder than it had any right to be under the blistering Texas Sunday. Mason Reed heard the crying before he saw anything, a sound so faint and broken it could have been a dying calf. But it wasn't. Wedged between two moss-covered rocks, where the current had trapped her, wrapped in nothing but a torn flour sack, was a baby girl. Her lips were blue as a winter sky, her tiny chest barely rising with each shallow breath. Mason's heart stopped dead in his chest. 10 years ago, he'd lost his 4-year-old son Daniel to flames he couldn't reach through, couldn't save him from. Now here was another child, dying in water he could touch, could save. His calloused hands shook violently as he lifted her free, the sack dripping creek water onto his worn boot. She was maybe 3 days old, umbilical cord still attached, tied off with what looked like butcher's twine. "Not today," he whispered hoarsely, pressing her against his chest. "Not on my watch, little one." Thunder, his bay stallion, sensed the urgency before Mason even turned. He mounted with a bundle tucked inside his jacket, feeling her faint heartbeat against his ribs like a hummingbird trapped in a cage, fighting to stay alive. The 5 miles to town had never felt longer. Every second she didn't cry was a second closer to losing her forever. His mind raced with questions that didn't matter right now. Who throws away a life like trash in the creek? What kind of monster does that? But those questions would have to wait. Only one thing mattered, the fragile life pressed against his chest, growing colder despite his warmth. Main Street appeared through the dust, and Mason made straight for Doc Stone's office, not caring who saw him burst through the door, still mounted on Thunder. "Doc, I need you, now." Dr. Samuel Stone had delivered half the babies in this county and buried too many of them over 60 years of practice. But when Mason Reed crashed through his door with a soaking wet flour sack bundle, even decades of medicine couldn't hide the shock that crossed his weathered face. The baby was hypothermic, severely dehydrated, and fading fast. Her skin had that waxy quality that meant minutes mattered, not hours. "Clear the examination table," Doc Stone barked, already reaching for warming blankets. "Alice, heat water now, and fetch every clean towel we have." His practiced hands moved with urgent precision, cutting away the wet sack, checking vitals with growing concern, listening to a heartbeat that stuttered like an old engine refusing to turn over. Mason stood frozen against the wall, his wet shirt clinging to his chest, watching the doctor work with the same helpless terror he'd felt watching his house burn 10 years ago. "She's fighting," Doc Stone murmured, more to himself than anyone. "Tough little thing. Got spirit in her yet." The door opened again, letting in a shaft of afternoon sunlight. Grace Harper stood in the threshold, her schoolteacher's dress dusty from the walk across town, her intelligent eyes taking in the desperate scene with immediate understanding. She'd been passing by when she heard the commotion through the open window. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to protect herself from caring about another child who might die. She'd buried her 2-year-old daughter Emma 5 years ago and sworn never to feel that soul-crushing pain again. But the baby made a sound, barely a whimper, more like a kitten mewing, and Grace's feet moved before her brain could stop them. "What do you need?" Her voice was steady even as her hands trembled. "Warm blankets. Keep them coming." Doc Stone didn't look up from his work. "And pray, Miss Harper, if you're the praying type." Grace and Mason locked eyes across the table. Two broken people, hovering over one tiny, fighting life. 3 days passed in a blur of exhausting vigils and whispered prayers. Doc Stone kept the baby in his back room, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat, every small sign of improvement or decline. Grace came every morning before school and every evening after the final bell rang, bringing fresh blankets and bottles of goat's milk from the Miller farm. Mason never left except to tend his horses, always returning within the hour like he was tied to the baby by invisible rope. They didn't talk much at first, just exchanged quiet nods, took turns holding the baby when she fussed, shared the heavy weight of waiting and hoping. But on the third night, when the baby finally nursed properly for the first time and fell into genuine restful sleep instead of unconscious stillness, something in both of them cracked wide open. "I had a son," Mason said quietly, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. "Daniel. He was 4 when the house caught fire one night. I was out in the barn checking on a sick mare. By the time I got there..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Never could. "That was 10 years ago. Haven't held a child since that night." Grace's hand stilled on the baby's blanket, her breath catching. "Emma. My daughter. Scarlet fever took her when she was 2. I kept teaching because I needed to be around children, needed their noise and chaos. But I never. She swallowed hard, fighting tears. I never let myself care again. It hurt too much to risk it. The baby stirred peacefully between them, her tiny hand finding Grace's finger and gripping it with surprising strength for someone who'd been so close to death. They both stared at that small connection, at the way this abandoned child was somehow stitching together 2 people who'd forgotten how to feel anything but grief. "She needs a name," Grace whispered into the quiet room. "We can't just keep calling her the baby." Mason nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the child's peaceful face. "Hope. We found her where there shouldn't have been any. Seems fitting." Hope grew stronger with each passing day, her dull gray eyes brightening into curious brown that seemed to take in everything around her. She responded to Grace's soft voice with tiny coos, reached for Mason's calloused fingers with increasing strength and determination. The doctor's back room became their entire world, a small sanctuary where old grief slowly transformed into something dangerously close to joy, to hope itself. Grace found herself humming lullabies she'd forgotten she knew, songs she used to sing to Emma before fever stole her away. Mason caught himself smiling at nothing in particular, just because Hope had gripped his thumb with her whole fist. They fell into an easy rhythm without ever discussing it. Grace handled feedings and baths with gentle expertise. Mason rocked Hope to sleep during his midnight visits when the demons of his past kept him awake. They were becoming something neither dared name out loud, a family. "You're natural with her," Doc Stone observed one afternoon, watching Mason expertly burp the baby against his broad shoulder. "Like you've been doing this your whole life." "Doesn't feel natural. Feels like theft somehow." Mason's jaw tightened, old pain flickering across his face. Someone's going to come looking for her eventually. Someone's going to want her back. "You hoping they do? Or hoping they don't?" Mason didn't answer. Couldn't. Because he didn't know anymore. That evening, Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived with news that made Mason's stomach drop like a stone down a well. "Had an inquiry from the Thornton place today. Seems Mayor Thornton's daughter, Rebecca, had a baby about 2 weeks back. Nobody's seen it since the birth. Mayor says it was stillborn, but—" The sheriff's eyes drifted to Hope, sleeping peacefully in Grace's protective arms. "Well, timing's mighty curious, wouldn't you say?" Grace's arms tightened instinctively around the baby. "You can't be serious." "The Thorntons?" Mayor William Thornton was the wealthiest, most powerful man in 3 counties. His word was law around these parts. His daughter Rebecca was rarely seen in public, a pale ghost who never spoke at town gatherings. Maria Sanchez arrived at Doc Stone's office at dawn the next morning, her weathered face streaked with tears and marked by sleepless nights of wrestling with her conscience. She'd been the Thornton family's housekeeper for 15 years. Watching Rebecca grow from a bright, laughing girl into a shadow of herself under her father's iron-fisted control. She couldn't carry the terrible secret another day. It was eating her alive from the inside. "I helped Rebecca hide the pregnancy from the mayor for 7 months, Maria confessed, her hands wringing her apron until the fabric threatened to tear. The father was a ranch hand good man named James Cooper. Mayor Thornton ran him off when he found out about the baby, threatened to kill him if he ever came back. He told Rebecca the baby would ruin everything, destroy his political career and their family name." Grace's face went white as fresh cotton. "She gave birth alone?" "No, I was there. I helped her through it. But when the mayor discovered the baby lived..." Maria's voice broke completely, tears streaming down her lined face. "He paid a man, Carl Jenkins, a drunk who owed him money to take the baby away. Said to make it look like it just disappeared into thin air. Carl was supposed to leave her at a church in the next county over, give her a chance at life somewhere else. But he was drunk that night. Mean drunk. He threw her in Miller's Creek instead. Figured nobody would ever know the difference." Mason's fists clenched so hard his knuckles went bone white. "Rebecca knows what her father did? She's been crying for 2 straight weeks. The mayor told her the baby died during birth, that it was God's will. He won't let her leave the house now. She doesn't know Hope survived. She doesn't know her daughter is alive and fighting." Doc Stone's face was grave as winter. "This is a serious accusation, Maria. Mayor Thornton has expensive lawyers, political power. Connections that reach all the way to Austin. I don't care anymore. Maria's voice turned fierce, protective. That baby deserves to live. Rebecca deserves to know her daughter survived. And that man deserves to face justice for what he's done. Mayor William Thornton arrived at Doc Stone's office 3 hours later with the force of a summer dust storm, expensive tailored suit, cold, calculating eyes, and 3 slick lawyers flanking him like hired guns. Rebecca trailed behind them, her face hollow and haunted, her eyes red-rimmed from weeks of crying. When she first saw Hope sleeping peacefully in Grace's protective arms, she made a sound like a wounded animal, raw and broken. "That's my baby," Rebecca whispered, reaching out with trembling hands toward the child she'd been told was dead. "She's alive? My baby girl is alive?" "Be quiet, Rebecca." The mayor's voice could have frozen whiskey solid. His cold eyes swept over Mason and Grace with pure contempt, like they were dirt on his expensive boots. "I understand you've been caring for an abandoned infant. How noble and charitable of you. But this child belongs to my family, and I'm here to reclaim what's mine." "Reclaim?" Mason stepped forward, every inch of his 6-foot frame radiating barely controlled fury. "You mean the baby you paid a drunk to throw in the creek like garbage? The one who would have died cold and alone if I hadn't found her by pure chance?" Mayor Thornton's expression didn't flicker even slightly. "I have no idea what lies you've been told, Mr. Reed. My daughter suffered a tragic stillbirth 2 weeks ago. This infant must belong to someone else entirely." "Look at her!" Rebecca's voice broke through, stronger than anyone had ever heard it, years of submission cracking apart. "Look at her eyes, Father. She has Grandmother Catherine's eyes, the same exact shade. This is my daughter, my Hope, and you tried to murder her to protect your precious reputation." The room went silent except for Hope's soft breathing. Even the lawyers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly uncertain. "You're overwrought and hysterical," the mayor said coldly, dismissively. "Not thinking clearly. This is exactly why you couldn't keep the child. You're mentally unstable." "Unfit." Hope began to cry, small arms reaching desperately for Grace instead of toward her biological mother. That simple gesture spoke volumes about who this child knew, who she trusted, who she loved. The courthouse was packed to capacity. Seemed like every soul in 3 counties had come to witness this fight between power and love. Judge Thomas Parker, 70 years old and sharp as new barbed wire, surveyed the crowded room with the stern expression of a man who'd seen every kind of human ugliness imaginable and still somehow believed justice could prevail. Mayor Thornton's lead attorney, a slick man from Dallas wearing a suit that cost more than most folks' yearly wages, presented their case with practiced, polished precision. "Your Honor, biological rights are sacred under law. Rebecca Thornton is the child's natural mother. The Thornton family has substantial wealth, social standing, and abundant resources to provide for this infant's every need. These 2 individuals," he gestured dismissively at Mason and Grace, "are unmarried, unrelated strangers with absolutely no legal standing whatsoever." Mason's testimony came next, and he spoke plainly in his rough cowboy's voice that carried clearly across the hushed courtroom. "I found Hope dying in Miller's Creek 3 weeks ago. Whoever put her there wanted her dead, wanted her gone. For 3 weeks now, Grace and I have been her parents in every way that actually matters. We've walked the floors when she cried through the night. We've fed her, changed her, loved her with everything we have. That's not nothing, Your Honor. That's everything." The Dallas lawyer smirked condescendingly. "Love doesn't override legal custody and blood rights, Mr. Reed. The law is quite clear on this matter." Then Grace stood up, and the entire courtroom collectively held its breath. "I was a teacher for 12 years, she began quietly, her educated voice steady and clear. "I know something about children, about how they grow and learn and what they need. And I know abuse when I see it clear as day." Her eyes locked directly on Mayor Thornton with fierce courage. "Rebecca Thornton is 19 years old. She's never been allowed to make a single decision in her entire life. Her father controlled who she saw, where she went, what she wore, every aspect of her existence. When she got pregnant, he didn't help her. He tried to erase the evidence. He paid a man to dispose of a living baby like she was trash, to be discarded." Rebecca's testimony shattered every carefully constructed fiction Mayor Thornton had built over weeks of planning. Through streaming tears and a voice that shook but never broke, She described the pregnancy her father called a disgrace and a curse, the agonizing labor she endured alone except for Maria's kind hands, the soul-crushing horror of being told her baby died when she distinctly heard that first precious cry. She described years of iron control, threats whispered in dark hallways, psychological manipulation that made her believe she deserved nothing better than his cruelty. "I love my daughter more than my own life," Rebecca said, her voice finally breaking completely. "But I'm not ready to be her mother yet. Not right now. I need time to heal first, to become someone strong enough to protect her from him. And right now, the only people who can truly do that are Mason and Grace. They already love her. They've already proven they'll fight for her." Mayor Thornton's face transformed into a mask of pure rage. "You're throwing away your entire family for two nobodies? For common ranch trash?" "No, Father." Rebecca met his eyes directly for the first time in her life, standing tall. "I'm choosing my daughter's life and future over your pride and reputation. There's a difference." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Parker's gavel cracked repeatedly against the bench until silence finally fell like snow. He sat back heavily, weathered hands folded, studying the faces before him, the controlling father whose power was crumbling, the broken daughter finding her voice, the abandoned baby now sleeping peacefully in Grace's loving arms, and the two strangers who'd become her fiercest protectors without hesitation. "I've been a judge for 35 years, he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I've seen good people do terrible things out of fear, and broken people do miraculous things out of love. This case is actually simple when you strip away all the legal maneuvering. A baby was abandoned to die. Two people saved her and loved her unconditionally. That's all that truly matters here." He brought the gavel down with absolute finality. "Custody is awarded to Mason Reed and Grace Harper, jointly, with the clear stipulation that Rebecca Thornton retains full visitation rights whenever she wishes. Mayor Thornton, you're under official investigation for conspiracy to commit murder. This court is adjourned." 6 transformative months passed like water flowing downstream. Mayor Thornton's investigation revealed a vast web of corruption and abuse of power that ended his political career completely and landed him in the state prison. Carl Jenkins, the man who'd thrown Hope in the creek, finally turned himself in and confessed everything, his conscience and the whiskey finally overpowering his cowardice. Rebecca moved into a small cottage near town and started working at the general store, slowly building an independent life of her own for the first time in 19 years. And Mason and Grace fell deeply, inevitably, in love. It happened slowly at first, then all at once in the quiet moments rocking Hope to sleep together, in shared morning coffee while the baby cooed happily between them, in the way Mason's rough hand would unconsciously find Grace's during Hope's bedtime stories. They'd both been so thoroughly broken, so absolutely convinced love was permanently behind them, buried with their lost children. Hope had proven them beautifully wrong. The wedding was simple and perfect. The whole town gathered outside Doc Stone's office on a crisp October morning with blue skies stretching forever. Hope, now 8 months old and thriving beyond all expectations, served as the world's youngest and most adorable flower girl, held securely by Rebecca as Mason and Grace exchanged vows they'd written themselves during long nights. "I thought I'd used up all my chances at happiness 10 years ago," Mason said, his voice rough with overwhelming emotion. "You and Hope taught me that life gives us exactly as many chances as we're brave enough to take." Grace smiled through joyful tears. "I thought my heart died and was buried with my daughter Emma. But Hope didn't replace her. She could never do that. She helped me remember that love isn't finite or limited. It multiplies and expands. And you, Mason Reed, multiplied mine beyond measure." Judge Parker officiated with a smile softening his usually stern face. Rebecca stood close by, holding Hope, tears streaming freely down her face, not from sadness or loss, but from profound relief at seeing her daughter completely surrounded by unconditional love. Hope's 5th birthday party filled the Double Bar Ranch with pure joy and laughter, children from Grace's classroom running wild through the fields, townspeople who'd watched this impossible family form against all odds, and Rebecca, now happily engaged to a kind banker who treated her like precious gold. Doc Stone presided over the elaborate cake cutting with grandfatherly pride shining in his eyes. Even stern Judge Parker made a special appearance, his gift a delicate silver locket engraved with Hope Reed Harper in flowing script. Hope stood at the very center of everything, her bright brown eyes sparkling with pure happiness, her dark curls bouncing as she laughed with complete abandon. She didn't remember the creek, or the cold, or the terror of abandonment. She only knew love fierce, protective, chosen love that had built a real family from broken pieces and shattered hearts. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Mason said gently, kneeling beside his daughter in the dust. Hope looked slowly around at all the gathered faces, her Papa Mason with his weathered, kind smile, her Mama Grace with her gentle teaching hands, Aunt Rebecca who visited every Sunday without fail, Doc Stone who'd saved her fragile life, Judge Parker who'd fought for justice, and all the people who'd stood up to power to keep her safe. She shook her head decisively, dark curls dancing. "I don't need any wish, Papa. I already have absolutely everything I could ever want." The adults exchanged glances, eyes glistening with emotion. From the innocent mouth of a child came the wisdom they'd all desperately needed to hear and believe. That night, Grace tucked Hope into bed in the room they'd painted cheerful yellow and filled completely with love. Hope's small hand reached up to touch her mother's face with infinite tenderness. "Mama, tell me the story again, please." "About how Papa found me in the creek." Grace smiled, gently brushing hair from Hope's forehead with familiar ritual. "Once upon a time, a brave cowboy was riding by Miller's Creek when he heard the faintest crying." As Hope's breathing gradually slowed into peaceful sleep, Mason appeared silently in the doorway, watching his wife and daughter with wonder that never faded even slightly. They'd all been broken once, Mason, by devastating fire, Grace by cruel fever, Rebecca by years of control, Hope by deliberate abandonment. But they'd chosen each other, fought fiercely for each other, and became family not through blood or law, but through absolutely unwavering love and daily commitment. Family is not determined by blood, but by the conscious choice to stay. Love that is chosen is infinitely stronger than love that is merely obligated. A child truly belongs to those who fight to keep them safe, who show up every single day without fail, who prove their love through actions and sacrifice, not just words and promises. Hope smiled peacefully in her sleep, completely secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, home.